Good evening. Welcome to the Glazov gang. Our gang members this evening: Susanne Reyto, author of Pursuit of Freedom; Mark Tapson, Shillman Journalism Fellow at the David Horowitz Freedom Center; and Eric Allen Bell, modern-day intellectual, filmmaker, and writer. Glazov gang members, welcome to the program. We have a new gang member with us this evening. I usually warn every new gang member of something. Can you gang members please tell Susanne Reyto the rule?
I can't remember.
You can check in anytime you like, but you can never leave.
No, you can check out anytime you
like.
like.
What did I say, check in?
Yes.
Sorry.
I thought you had a rock and roll pass.
Well, it's all a blur.
You mean we're all checked in?
Yeah, you can check out anytime you like, but you can never leave.
Right.
Okay.
Welcome to the program. Ladies and gentlemen, this segment is called Terrorism for Hostages. It might have to switch to Money for Hostages because we're going to discuss Egypt and what's happening there. But before we do, we have two ex-lefties at the table, but Susanne Reyto would never have even thought of being a leftist. Can you for a minute tell us a little bit about your past, introduce yourselves to our viewers, and counsel Eric and Mark a little bit on why they should never have been on the left in the first place?
Help us out.
Well, I was born and raised in Hungary and grew up under communism, socialism, any of those isms that we prefer not to even talk about. But we must, because we know how much socialism has played in our country lately, and it's creeping in. It's not creeping Sharia, it's creeping socialism.
What was a little bit of the persecution or suffering that you had experienced, if you don't mind me asking?
Not at all. My parents wanted to leave, and under very difficult circumstances, we were captured and imprisoned. And as a 5-year-old, I was kidnapped from my parents as an extra punishment. It wasn't enough to be captured and thrown into prison, but they kidnapped me and didn't know where I was as a 5-year-old separated from parents, didn't have any idea where I was or if I will ever see my parents again. And fortunately, that happened. My parents were in for a year, and I was only in prison for 3 months. But then when we finally got reunited, very short time after, the Hungarians brought an edict and we were taken to a communist internment camp. And that was for 29 months. And that was no picnic either.
And Susanne, you suffered under communism and your family suffered under communism. You came to the understanding in your life eventually that the roots of that persecution and horror was in socialism, correct?
Totally. Socialism, communism, and the lack of rule of law, everything is from centralized government, and they tell you totalitarianism is a problem.
So by living in the West today and in the United States, having experienced those horrors, do we not have a president of the United States that's perpetrating those he's perpetrating the same principles? His behavior is founded on the same principles that brought the horror to your homeland. Am I not correct?
Absolutely, but I think his upbringing was absolutely steeped in socialism, Marxism, and he's just learning to deal with it in real life.
Yeah.
And sadly, he's our president who's taking us down the wrong path. Coming to this great country, we could have had a little tweaking here and there, but 5 days before he became president, he said, within 5 days, we're going to fundamentally transform this country. Did many of us listen?
Right.
I think most people didn't.
Susanne, what is wrong with people like Eric and Mark in the West that took them so long to figure these things out?
I think it's wonderful that they're finally converted.
Okay, well, gentlemen, and I apologize for being so rude towards you. Thank you very much, Susanne. And Eric, let me begin with you now on money for hostages. There was news that the Obama administration was offering the blind sheik and terrorists in prison to exchange for Egyptian hostages. Now we're hearing news, and I'm not sure if that has been confirmed about that particular deal that was offered. Now we're hearing news that money has been exchanged for the release of hostages. What do you think about this whole thing of the United States giving things for the release of hostages?
I think that it just signals to the mindset there that Obama is compliant. I mean, apologizing to Karzai, now playing ball with Egypt, dealing with, hostages. It's really a sign of weakness. If we roll the tape back a little bit further, we were told the Arab Spring was going to liberate everybody. There's going to be democracy. American NGOs go in to bring democracy. They go from being prisoners to hostages, and now hostages being traded for terrorists. What does that tell us about the mindset of the Egyptian people and their rulers?
Eric, was Ronald Reagan correct in simply the position where we do not negotiate with terrorists?
Absolutely.
Okay, so this is a big mistake that either, if this is to be confirmed, that they've handed money over, I think it's something like $5 million, am I correct?
Over $5
for the
million.
release of these hostages in Egypt. We're kind of seeing an Iran situation, but being played out in a different
You know, a
narrative.
short way of saying what you just said is under Obama, our tax money funds Sharia law and the Muslim Brotherhood.
Is this not an encouragement to terrorists to take more hostages and will give them more money?
It pays.
Mark, how do you read all this?
Well, sure, absolutely. I mean, terrorists figure that if we're going to pay money or negotiate in any way, then terrorism works, hostage-taking works. And it just encourages further incidents like that.
If those reports were true, that there was a deal offered to release the blind sheikh and other terrorists from prison, I mean, this is just crazy, isn't it, coming from the Obama administration? Why would you offer terrorists that are sitting in American prison in exchange for innocent people? What's the mindset of the administration here?
Well, I think you've got a very submissive president who's very submissive in terms of dealing with the Muslim Brotherhood and Islamic extremism in general. And you see that he is compliant, is the word that you used. I mean, I think his mindset is basically, let's win their hearts and minds. Let's show them that we're nice, that America's great. Let's apologize, show them we're not the enemy, and that doesn't work. It only empowers them. They view it as our weakness.
It can't be done. We cannot win their hearts and minds.
How do you win the hearts and minds of the Ted Bundys and Jeffrey Dahmers of the world? And I would draw some analogies there. Suzanne, how do you read this whole thing?
I think it's a tragedy to pay for hostages because setting the wrong precedent will just embolden them and do it more. Now, I must say, if I was the parent or the mother of one of those hostages, I might feel differently. Mm-hmm. But on a matter of principle, I really believe that hostage-taking does not deserve to pay for and reward them with paying over $5 million. And do we really know whether it was $5 million? It could be $7.5 million. And who's paying? We, the taxpayers, are funding that.
Who's receiving this money?
The Egyptian government, or maybe the Muslim Brotherhood. We don't know.
And they're probably intermixed now. In other words, what
sure.
is, Suzanne, the left was instructing or teaching us that the Arab Spring was some kind of a democracy movement. What is happening in Egypt today? This is a catastrophe.
Well, I think many of us should have known that the only people who were organized and ready to take over were the Muslim Brotherhood. So anytime when there's a vacuum, whoever is best and most organized will take over. And there they are. There is no Arab Spring. They call it the Arab Winter because most people are in a much worse situation.
Eric, this is a terrible situation in the Middle East because we have dictators that are not democratic, but they're holding the Islamists in check. We get rid of the dictators, then the Islamists, Al-Qaeda, and the Muslim Brotherhood come in. What's a way out of this?
I think you've hit on an important point that has to do with human nature, not just Islam or politics. When there's not a fundamental revolution in one's consciousness, whether individually or as a nation, nothing changes. It's just redecorating. Mm-hmm. So what happened? The Egyptian revolution was redecorating. Mm-hmm. Let's replace tyranny for tyranny and call that a revolution.
Or the devil we know is better than the devil we don't know. I think what's coming to power, as in what happened in Iran in 1979, this is much worse, what's going to be following now. Mark?
Well, democracy is only as good as the values that you bring to it. And in Egypt, the values that are being brought to their democracy are the values of Islamic fundamentalism, which are basically antithetical to what we perceive to be democracy, which is human rights and freedom of speech and all the other freedoms that we have. And so democracy in itself is not necessarily the ideal. You want to get the right kinds of people to run the democracy.
I think it's very difficult to transfer our way of democracy to a country that has never known it.
Right.
It takes transformation. It takes a lot of years. It can be done overnight. Democracy comes in different flavors.
Suzanne, Susanne,
apply to different people.
how do we build a democracy in a Muslim country where 80% or more of the people believe in female genital mutilation, stonings of adulterers, murdering, killing apostates? How is this done?
I don't believe we can do it overnight, and it's a very difficult lesson to learn. However, we need education is one way, maybe, slowly and very slowly to transform. Because if women have a chance to have a little bit more power, a little bit more rights, maybe a few women leaders can do something about it. But it's not an overnight issue. We can change them, but we need to recognize that democracy is a very, very difficult business.
Let's exit from this first segment. Eric, Obama calls you desperately, saying he has no more faith in his advisors, and asks you, what do I do with Egypt? What would you tell him?
My sense is that democracy and Islam cannot coexist. And the majority of people in Egypt want Islamism. That's what they want. Human rights and Islam can't coexist.
So what does he do? What does he do? What do you tell him?
Get Egypt to fear us. Fear. They need to fear us. They're not going to be slowly educated and realize, the error of their way. They need to be so afraid of us that they don't dare impose Sharia law.
Mark?
I got to go along with that. I think it's high time that America showed real strength instead of submission or apologetics. I mean, no one respects that, especially in the Arab world. They perceive that to be weakness, and it just incurs more attacks.
Two former liberals are hawks on the subject of Egypt.
Yeah, definitely.
Susanne, your last word on Egypt before we leave.
I think we need to live by these laws and make sure we don't show weakness. I always said when Obama said, I want to be loved because after Bush, supposedly people didn't care for us, I'd rather be feared than loved.
I think some mafia members believe that as well when they take control of the mafia. Thank you very much for joining this first segment of the Glazov Gang. Join us tomorrow evening for the Glazov Gang with the same three guests when we discuss Obama's romance with the Muslim Brotherhood.